He showed up to support a children's charity, wearing a simple black suit, no entourage, no cameras. But the woman at the door looked him up and down and said he didn't belong. Seconds later, Keanu Reeves turned away in silence. 1 week later, his quiet revenge would shake the entire world. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sky over Los Angeles was a velvet curtain of early evening blue. Spotlights shimmered into the air, dancing in front of the city's most exclusive hotel, where tonight's charity gala promised elegance, wealth, and spectacle. The marble driveway leading to the entrance of the Celestia Grand Hotel was cordoned off with velvet ropes, and paparazzi lined the red carpet like vultures waiting for their next glossy headline. Laughter echoed from the arrivals. Fashion icons, celebrities, business moguls, all dressed to dazzle under the flash of cameras. A sleek, dark SUV pulled up to the edge of the curb. The door opened slowly, but no one stepped out right away. There was no team of assistants, no bodyguards, no paparazzi swarming. Just one man stepping into the glittering chaos with quiet confidence. Keanu Reeves emerged from the car, dressed in a simple black suit. No tailored designer labels, no diamond cufflinks or flashy watches. His shoes were polished but modest. He didn't wear the kind of spectacle this crowd expected. He walked toward the glowing glass doors alone, moving gently but deliberately. He had been invited to support an initiative aimed at funding arts education for children in underprivileged neighborhoods. It was the kind of cause he deeply believed in, the kind that didn't need cameras to matter. Photographers hesitated at first. It wasn't until one of them whispered, "Wait, is that Keanu?" that the shutters began to click, but even then only half-heartedly. Keanu didn't stop for photos. He simply gave a small nod to the camera pit and walked past, hands in his pockets, expression composed and humble. To some, he looked out of place. To others, he looked like the only real human on a stage of carefully curated illusions. Inside the hotel entrance, guests trickled in through glass double doors. A uniformed security guard stood behind a check-in podium with a printed guest list, scanning names and confirming identities with the efficiency of someone trained to spot trouble and avoid scenes. His name badge read, Evan. He couldn't have been more than 25. His eyes scanned the crowd nervously. Keanu waited patiently as Evan checked in the couple ahead of him, who smiled and tossed a careless joke about which island their money had helped build. Then it was Keanu's turn. He stepped forward, pulled out his phone, and held up the invitation email. "Hi," he said softly. "Keanu Reeves. I believe I'm on the list." Evan took the phone, eyes darting to the screen, then back to the list. He blinked twice, then began scrolling, finger moving rapidly down the names. Then up again. He checked a second page. His brow furrowed, and he flipped the clipboard. No sign of Keanu's name. "I'm sorry, sir," Evan said, his voice tightening. "I don't see you here." Keanu tilted his head slightly, then offered a calm smile. "That's strange. I was invited by the Langston Foundation directly. The email came from your office." Evan's face flushed. He looked helpless. That was when she arrived. Her heels clicked across the marble floor like a warning bell. Every inch of Genevieve Langston radiated authority and wealth. She wore a silver gown that shimmered like frost under the chandeliers. Her platinum hair pulled into a sleek knot that revealed a jawline honed by money and control. Her assistant trailed behind her, clutching a clipboard like a shield. Genevieve didn't need to announce herself. The room adjusted to her presence. Conversations slowed, eyes turned. She was the executive director of the Langston Foundation and the architect of tonight's spectacle. Every floral arrangement, every plated appetizer, every name on the guest list had her signature precision behind it. She stopped just short of Keanu and Evan. Her smile was the kind that could cut glass. "Is there a problem?" she asked, though her tone made it clear she already assumed there was. Evan hesitated, swallowing hard. "This gentleman says he was invited, but I can't find his name." Genevieve turned her gaze to Keanu. Her eyes swept over him slowly, calculating, taking in the unbranded suit, the absence of visible wealth, the quiet posture. She knew who he was. Everyone did. But she didn't see power in his presence. She saw risk, disruption, a man who didn't play by the rules of exclusivity. "And your name is?" she asked, even though she already knew. "Keanu Reeves," he replied calmly. Her painted smile didn't waver. "I see," she said. Keanu held up his phone again. "Here's the original invitation, sent from your office 2 weeks ago." Genevieve didn't even glance at the screen. She looked at Evan. "Thank you, Evan. I'll take it from here." Evan looked relieved to step aside. Genevieve faced Keanu fully now. She lowered her voice just enough to appear discreet, but her words were designed to be heard. "Mr. Reeves, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Keanu met her gaze. "How so?" "This evening is about showcasing a very specific image," she said, her tone polite but cool. "The donors tonight represent the most influential institutions in the country, legacy families, major foundations. We're cultivating an atmosphere of continuity, class, and tradition. Your presence, while certainly interesting, doesn't quite align with the event's intended direction." He said nothing. His silence forced her to keep talking. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at an event with a different tone," she added. "A tech forum, maybe? Something less curated?" A few photographers nearby had noticed the exchange. Lenses shifted in their direction. One camera began to click quietly, capturing the moment without a flash. Keanu didn't move. He looked at the glowing glass doors behind her, where the wealthy filtered in laughing, adjusting their jewels, sipping champagne before they even reached the ballroom. He looked back at Genevieve. "I came to support the children's program," he said softly. "Not for the photographs, not for the donors, just the kids." Genevieve's smile hardened. "And that's admirable," she said, with the faintest trace of mockery. "But the event is already underway, and I can't allow disruptions." Keanu looked at her for a long moment. Not with anger, not with defiance, just stillness. There was something unsettling about it. His complete calm, the way he didn't flinch or shrink under the weight of her judgment. Cameras clicked again. The quiet tension between them drew the attention of more reporters. One of them whispered Keanu's name, and suddenly microphones were being pulled out, their red lights blinking. Genevieve noticed. Her posture changed. She raised her voice just enough to be picked up. "Some people think fame is a free pass," she said, glancing toward her assistant. "But real charity isn't about showing up and expecting attention. It's about legacy, quiet dedication, not photo ops." Keanu said nothing. The security guard, Evan, looked horrified. The assistant scribbled something on her clipboard. A young woman in a shimmering gold dress brushed past them, laughing loudly at something on her phone. She didn't even notice the man she passed was Keanu Reeves. Genevieve straightened her shoulders and turned to the cameras with a gentle smirk, as if she'd just dismissed a gatecrasher at her own wedding. "Thank you for understanding, Mr. Reeves," she said. "I'm sure you'll find another cause more aligned with your style." Keanu slowly nodded once. "Thank you for clarifying," he said, voice quiet. "Enjoy your evening." He turned and walked back down the red carpet, the click of his shoes the only sound for a moment. Flashbulbs fired wildly now, no longer because he was attending, but because he was being turned away. Photographers and guests whispered, trying to understand what just happened. Was he uninvited? Had something gone wrong? He reached the edge of the red carpet where the city met silence. He stopped with one hand on the door of his car and turned back, just once. Through the glass, he saw Genevieve still standing at the entrance, lips tight in satisfaction, already accepting compliments from a nearby donor. He looked away and slid into the car. Inside, the noise vanished. The door shut softly. His driver turned toward him, waiting for instruction. "Home, sir?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He stared at the glowing entrance of the hotel, the silhouettes of guests dancing behind the tinted glass. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through a short list of contacts and tapped a single name. The call connected on the first ring. A woman's voice came through, curious and alert. "Keanu?" He didn't smile. His voice was calm. "Clara, it's time." There was a long pause on the other end. Then she said what he already knew. "You're sure?" Amy made their choice tonight. Keanu looked out the window, at the skyline rising around him like a fortress of wealth and indifference. "Now we make ours." The car pulled away, quiet as a shadow, disappearing into the city as the gala carried on behind closed doors. Unaware that the man they had just rejected was about to show them what real giving looked like. The city lights blurred past the windows of the SUV as Keanu sat silently in the back seat, his phone still in his hand. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound between him and the driver. He didn't speak. He didn't fidget. His calm exterior masked something sharper, something precise, like a knife honed in silence. His thumb hovered over one contact, Clara Nguyen. He pressed the name. The phone rang once, twice, then a soft voice answered. "Keanu?" He didn't waste a breath. "It's time." A pause. Then her voice sharpened. "You're sure?" "Thank you. They made it very clear tonight." She let out a slow breath on the other end. "Then I'll start the upload." "Do it," he said. "Let's go live within the week." Keanu ended the call and lowered the phone into his lap. He closed his eyes for a moment, but not from weariness. His mind was turning back to that first meeting with Clara. Before Project Beacon had a name, before the world had a clue what was coming. He remembered the diner, a small, worn-down place in Koreatown, a quiet booth tucked near the window. Rain pattered against the glass like whispers. Clara had arrived 10 minutes early, her long, dark hair tied back, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and a faint stain on her lab coat. She looked like someone the world had overlooked for too long. She had brought a single device with her. It looked like a coin, flat, silver, unmarked. Keanu had watched her place it on the table like it was sacred. "What is it?" he had asked, gently. She had lifted her chin and said, "Proof." He smiled at the memory. Back in the diner, Clara had reached for her tablet and tapped the screen. The device lit up. A soft beam projected upward into the air, forming a three-dimensional image. A small school building appeared in perfect detail, glowing above the table. Then, translucent lines connected the structure to tiny floating data points. Books, desks, a new roof, digital chalkboards, food for the cafeteria, everything bought with a donation. "All of this is real?" Keanu had asked, leaning in. Clara nodded. "It tracks every dollar spent by a charity and shows where it goes in real time. You can't fake it. You can't bury it in admin costs. The tech pulls live receipts, verifies purchases, tracks delivery, and projects it in an accessible visual form. It's a map of impact, unfiltered, unedited." "And what do you call it?" he asked. "Project Beacon," she'd said. Keanu had stayed silent for a while after she said the name. Project Beacon. It had the weight of something that mattered, something meant to guide people home. Clara had waited, nervous. She wasn't used to being listened to. Most of the investors she'd pitched to before never even let her finish her sentence. Some laughed, others nodded politely and never called back. She had built this entire prototype on a grant meant for university lab equipment, and a loan she hadn't told her family about. "I've shown this to 17 organizations," she said quietly. "None of them want it." Keanu's eyes narrowed, confused. "Why not?" She looked at him, wounded but not surprised. "Because it makes corruption impossible. Because it doesn't leave room for hiding inflated overhead. If donors can see exactly how their money's spent, there's nowhere to run when it isn't helping people. She tapped the screen again. The image above the table changed. This time, a shelter appeared. The projection split into rooms, one for women and children, another for medical care, another for food storage. Labels hovered over each section: supplies, staffing, construction, clean water, all of it time-stamped and cost-tracked. "It's too honest," she said. "Too efficient. No one wants a spotlight this bright." Keanu had leaned back slowly, studying her. "And what do you want?" he asked. She swallowed. Her answer came without hesitation. "I want people to see where good actually happens." They had sat in silence for a long minute. Then Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. He flipped to a page with scribbled names and notes. The list was short. "Clara, if I fund this," he said, "it needs to stay quiet." She blinked. "No public name, no press releases, no celebrity endorsement label. I don't want my name on it. I don't want to be the face of it. This has to be about the work, not the man funding it." Clara stared at him, trying to understand. "But why?" Keanu looked around the diner, at the worn vinyl seats and chipped coffee cups, at the people sipping cheap drinks and whispering about rent and jobs. "Because people like me get attention for breathing," he said softly, "and people like you get ignored even when you're trying to save the world. That needs to change." Her throat tightened. "I don't want credit," he added. "I want results." And that was the beginning. Keanu had transferred funds within the week, enough to build a full lab, hire a development team, and distribute prototypes to test locations. Clara moved into a basement workspace in East Hollywood and worked 16-hour days, running diagnostics, refining the tech, training administrators in how to use it. But the real preparation, the vision, was still forming. Clara didn't know it yet, but Keanu had something far bigger in mind. As the months passed, Clara's lab became a quiet command center. Project Beacon evolved. The devices grew smaller, faster, more efficient. Keanu visited only twice, always unannounced, always with a thermos of black coffee and a notebook full of ideas. The second time he came, he brought a folded piece of paper with 12 handwritten names. They were not board members, not CEOs. They were principals of schools that had lost funding, directors of overwhelmed homeless shelters, nurses from clinics that were about to shut down, fathers, mothers, people doing the work no one wanted to see. "These are the people I want to start with," Keanu said. Clara looked at the names, confused. "Start with what?" "The test." She looked at him closely, searching his face. "You're planning something." Keanu didn't deny it. He pointed to one of the names, a school librarian in South Central LA. Then another, a former foster youth who had opened a housing co-op for homeless teens. He tapped the last name, a pediatric oncologist who ran a clinic on weekends for uninsured kids. "These people don't need more donations," he said. "They need proof that someone believes in what they're doing. They need dignity. They need transparency. And I want every dollar sent to them to be seen by the world." She nodded slowly. "And then?" Keanu met her eyes. "Then we scale it. Fast. Quietly. No fanfare. Just impact." He paused. "And one day, when the moment is right, we show them everything." That moment had come. As Clara ended the call with Keanu on the night of the gala, she walked to her workbench in the dimly lit lab. On the surface were rows of tiny silver discs, each one no bigger than a coin, gleaming softly under the blue-tinted lights. Every one of them had been encoded, tested, and pre-assigned to a location. She picked one up and turned it in her fingers. A week ago, she'd almost given up. The weight of waiting, of hiding, of building something no one was allowed to see. It had nearly broken her. But now the timing was perfect. She walked over to the main terminal and began entering the final commands. Her eyes burned with tiredness, but her hands were steady. Each command activated a single unit. Each unit, once placed, would speak in images that couldn't be twisted, filtered, or spun. She leaned forward and spoke softly into the microphone. Project Beacon, activation protocol initiated. Begin regional coordination phase. The screens lit up. One by one, red dots filled the U.S. map before her. One by one, the people Keanu had chosen, teachers, nurses, social workers, would receive their first shipment in the next 48 hours. Clara didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply whispered, "Let's light the way." And somewhere across the city, as a gala carried on in polished silence, Keanu Reeves sat in the back of a moving car, looking up at a sky full of stars the city had long forgotten. Clara Nguyen stood alone in the quiet of her lab, the glow of the monitors casting soft shadows across the floor. Her hands were still, but her heart raced. Keanu's voice still echoed in her mind. It's time. She had waited months for those words. She just didn't expect them to come so suddenly, so soon after midnight, and so heavy with purpose. She turned back toward the silver devices, aligned like soldiers on her bench. Each one was encoded, tested, and uniquely registered to its recipient. Dozens more were packed and ready for shipment. Hundreds would follow. She sat at her terminal and entered the next phase code. A soft beat confirmed the regional calibration process had begun. They were no longer prototypes. They were now tools of something far bigger, something that had outgrown her lab. A message box blinked on her screen. From Keanu Reeves. "Can you finish the next 100 units by Friday?" Clara's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Her back ached. She hadn't slept in over 20 hours. But her reply was instant. Yes. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Keanu had been traveling for months under the radar. She remembered the scattered messages he'd sent from places far outside the spotlight. Photos of crumbling clinics, overgrown playgrounds, closed school gates, and makeshift shelters in old motels. He wasn't just sending money. He was listening. 2 months ago, he'd visited a food pantry in Kansas City that operated out of a church basement. The volunteers there had no idea who he was. He wore jeans, a ball cap, and an old hoodie. He'd spent 5 hours packing bags, delivering food to cars, and sweeping floors. No cameras, no interviews. Just work. He left behind a check for $10,000, not signed with his name, just the initials KR. The week after that, he was in rural Alabama, helping repaint a one-room library that served as both a community center and an after-school hub for kids whose homes had no internet. The librarian, Miss Carrie Price, had thanked him with a mason jar of lemonade and a handmade bookmark. He had kept it in his pocket ever since. Clara had seen those photos. She'd heard his voice when he called from the road. He didn't sound frustrated or angry. He sounded focused, centered. That rejection at the gala wasn't the start of something new. It was the final push for something he had already begun. Weeks before the gala, Keanu had quietly traveled through a rainstorm to reach a Native American reservation clinic in New Mexico. The place had a single doctor, no pharmacy, and an electrical grid so unstable that the staff often used lanterns during emergencies. Keanu sat with the doctor for hours, asking questions not about statistics or press opportunities, but about dignity, about what people really needed. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Elise Redhorse, told him something he would never forget. "We don't need another millionaire giving us a check and taking a photo. We need someone who stays long enough to see what the check can't fix." He stayed the whole day. He watched as a grandfather brought in his granddaughter who hadn't eaten for 2 days. He watched as the clinic's last bag of glucose was used. He asked how many people they served. Dr. Redhorse replied, "Whoever walks through the door." When he left, he asked for no public recognition, but he sent a van-load of supplies within 48 hours, not just medicine, tools, books, a new generator. He didn't post about it. Instead, he sent a message to Clara. Add this clinic to the test group. Let the beacon show what their courage looks like. Now, Clara stood in the lab, that message archived in her files, preparing to do just that. The distribution list had grown to 37 locations. Not massive hospitals, not polished nonprofit headquarters. Small places with real struggle and no spotlight. She loaded addresses into the shipment database, each location tied to a unique holographic device. When activated, the projectors would display a real-time visual ledger of how every cent was being used. From light bulbs to laptops, from bandages to backpacks. Clara had seen plenty of blueprints for innovation in her academic career, but this was different. This wasn't innovation for patents. It wasn't for press. It was for proof. Keanu's last voice memo still played in her mind. He had recorded it just 2 nights before the gala. I've spent my whole career being told I don't belong in Hollywood, in high society, in philanthropy. I've learned that the more quiet you are, the more people try to erase you. But what if the quiet ones are the ones really listening? What if the people the world ignores are the ones who already know how to fix it? His voice had paused, just briefly. We're going to light up the country, Clara, but not with spotlights, with truth. Make it about the people, not me. She remembered sitting in the lab that night, her hand pressed to her chest, trying not to cry. He didn't want applause, he wanted change. She looked down at the tracking dashboard. The shipments were locked in. The first batch of beacon devices would arrive by Thursday. She walked to the shipping table and sealed the last box by hand. Then she whispered to herself, "Let's show them what it really looks like." On the other side of the city, Keanu stood at the edge of a playground in East Los Angeles. It was the middle of the afternoon, and the air smelled faintly of sun-warmed asphalt and cut grass. The swings were rusted, the slide was cracked down the middle and taped with a faded warning sign. He leaned on the fence, unnoticed by the few parents watching their kids play in the heat. A boy in a Spider-Man t-shirt kicked a deflated soccer ball across the dirt. No shoes. Keanu watched quietly, his eyes following the boy's every move. An older man beside him, wearing a Parks Department vest, noticed. "You volunteering for the mural project?" the man asked, wiping his forehead. Keanu looked over, smiled faintly. "Not yet." "Well, we could use the help. Paint's flaking off faster than we can replace it." Keanu nodded. "What do you guys need most?" The man sighed. "New nets. Working water fountains, trash cans, mostly just for someone to care." Later that night, Keanu jotted the name of the park down in his notebook and circled it. It wasn't on the test list yet, but it would be. Not because it needed to look good, but because kids deserved a place that didn't feel forgotten. That was what drove him now. Not vengeance, not reputation, but memory. He remembered being 15, sitting in a chair in Toronto's social services office, listening to a social worker explain that he couldn't help with what wasn't on paper. He remembered a friend from high school who had slept in her car for 3 weeks and no one knew. He remembered his mother taking 2 buses to clean homes in the early morning so he could stay in school. He remembered the sound of locked doors and how cold rejection could feel in your chest. And now he remembered the look in Genevieve Langston's eyes when she said he didn't belong. It wasn't the insult that mattered, it was what it represented. The hundreds of others who got the same message every day, quietly, without a camera, without anyone noticing. Clara's lab was humming now. 37 devices were en route, each one a silent witness, waiting to tell a story in light and motion. Keanu stared at the wall in his home office, where he'd pinned Polaroids and hand-drawn maps of every location in the pilot phase. He walked over and picked up one of the photos. A shelter in Detroit. He'd stayed there once, years ago, under an assumed name. No one had recognized him, no one had cared. But the people had been kind. He pinned that photo in the center. Then he stepped back and looked at all the photos together. lines forming between them in his mind. It looked almost like a constellation. He whispered to himself, "We're not just building a network." He paused. "We're building something to guide people home." And this time, no one could shut the door. Genevieve Langston sat in the makeup chair of a bright Beverly Hills studio, her face illuminated by a perfect halo of white lights. A stylist hovered over her shoulders, gently adjusting a few strands of her platinum hair, while a makeup artist gave her one final dusting of translucent powder. The segment producer stood nearby, reading through the interview cue cards. "Remember to smile when she brings up the gala," the producer reminded her. "You handled that moment with such poise. Everyone loved it." Genevieve gave a slight, rehearsed smile. Not too much, just enough. This was her fourth interview in 2 days. Since the charity gala, media outlets had applauded her decisiveness and class. Social feeds were filled with headlines that made her look like a crusader for elite philanthropy. Langston preserves prestige at star-studded event. Charity meets standards thanks to sterling host. Women, integrity, said no. Genevieve Langston draws the line. She liked that one best. It sounded strong, authoritative. It sounded like she had done something that mattered. The talk show lights dimmed slightly as the host walked on set. They exchanged air kisses. A red light above the camera flicked on. And we're live in 3, 2. The interview began with applause. Genevieve smiled graciously. The host leaned forward, her tone gushing with admiration. "You've been making headlines this week. People are calling you the standard bearer of modern philanthropy. How does that feel?" Genevieve folded her hands neatly on her lap. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Which feels right," she said. "Because we can't let charity become chaos. Events like ours must be curated with care, not just for appearances, but to protect the purpose." The audience clapped again. "And of course," the host continued, "there was one viral moment everyone's still talking about, when you made the decision to turn away a surprise guest." Genevieve's smile didn't falter. "Yes, well, it's never easy to enforce boundaries, but I believe charity should reflect integrity, not impulse." No one said Keanu's name. That was part of the game. Let the public fill in the blanks. Let the mystery linger. Genevieve left the studio 30 minutes later to find paparazzi waiting near her car. Cameras flashed. A reporter shouted a question about that Hollywood star. She didn't respond. She just gave a smile, waved, and slid into her black sedan. She looked down at her phone. Dozens of new notifications. Another podcast request. A digital magazine wanted to feature her on the cover next month. She opened her calendar and noted the sudden flood of interest in Langston Foundation partnerships. It was, without a doubt, her moment. She had drawn a line, and the world had applauded. But that night, just after midnight, a photo popped up on her feed. It stopped her cold. It was a candid shot, not from a media outlet. It had been taken by a guest at the gala who hadn't realized what they were capturing at the time. Keanu Reeves, standing at the edge of the red carpet. His back was to the ballroom, his head tilted slightly toward the ground. There were no harsh shadows on his face, no dramatic expression, just a quiet stillness, one hand in his pocket, the other resting on the door of his car. What stood out wasn't the image itself, it was the caption beneath it. "I don't know what happened at the entrance, but I saw him say thank you and walk away, quietly, with more dignity than everyone inside that building combined." The post had over 50,000 likes. The comments underneath were growing by the minute. Genevieve's eyes lingered on the screen. Her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't know why. She tossed the phone onto the counter beside her bed and turned off the lamp. But sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, her assistant Ethan arrived early. He wore the same cautious expression he always did when he had something to say that might challenge her. "Morning, Ethan," she greeted, sipping her herbal tea. "Morning," he replied. "Just wanted to check your schedule before the meeting with the board." She glanced down at her planner. Yes, push the CNN call to tomorrow. I'd rather give them a full exclusive when the press has stabilized. He hesitated. You mean when the other story dies down? Her brow lifted. What story? Ethan shifted his weight. The photo of Mr. Reeves. It's getting traction. Not just social media now. A few op-eds are starting to pop up. Genevieve raised her chin slightly. And? He looked down at his tablet. There's a columnist who said your gala may have become the symbol of everything wrong with performative giving, that maybe real charity doesn't walk red carpets. Genevieve laughed, but it didn't come out easily. Since when does social media define integrity? Ethan didn't answer. She leaned back in her chair. Ethan, let me tell you something. Charity, real charity, isn't just about the result. It's about the experience, the structure, the credibility. These galas fund half the foundations in this city. I know, he said, but do they have to look like this? She stared at him. He kept going, carefully. I mean, I know you meant well, and maybe the decision at the door was about standards, but you're getting more praise for who you kept out than for who you helped let in. Doesn't that feel backwards? She said nothing. I just think, Ethan added quietly, that maybe the way we present kindness should feel kind. Genevieve's expression didn't change, but a silence fell over the room. She turned to her laptop and opened a browser. For a moment, she hovered over the search bar, then typed Keanu Reeves charity work. The results loaded instantly, hundreds of links. She clicked on the first article. Keanu Reeves secretly funds children's hospitals across North America. Below the headline was a quote from a nurse. Told us never to tell anyone it was from him. Said the kids didn't need a movie star, they needed hope. She clicked another link. How Keanu Reeves helped build a school in rural Paraguay. Without a single press release. And another, why Keanu refuses to put his name on donations. Genevieve felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't regret, yet. It wasn't guilt, either. It was something quieter. Something she didn't have words for. She closed the browser. That evening, she returned to the Langston Foundation headquarters. There was a stack of press kits waiting on her desk and a message from a luxury brand asking if she'd be interested in a partnership to host their next philanthropic initiative. She should have been thrilled. Instead, she opened her email and found an internal staff memo from Ethan. It was marked for review only. It was a proposal draft. Project title, Redefining Presence. A new standard for inclusion at Langston events. Genevieve began to scroll. Her eyes paused on a paragraph halfway down the page. We often measure impact by visibility, but visibility doesn't equal value. The question we must ask is, are we amplifying the cause or ourselves? She exhaled slowly. Genevieve got up and walked to the large window behind her desk. Sunset was crawling over the skyline, painting the glass with soft gold and amber. In the reflection, she saw herself. Flawless, curated, untouched by the chaos outside. But something in her reflection didn't feel complete. She remembered Keanu's face in that photo, the stillness, the quiet composure, the way he walked away with his head held high, no one rushing to defend him, no PR team, no counterstatement, just silence. And somehow, that silence had been louder than all her interviews combined. Her fingers tapped the glass absent-mindedly. She wasn't used to being questioned, not by the press, not by her staff, certainly not by herself. But now, a different question had begun to bloom. Not, did I protect the integrity of the event, but did I silence something that mattered? She stepped back from the window and returned to her desk. This time, she didn't open a press kit. She opened her email and began to draft a message. To Ethan. Subject, let's talk. Message, I've been thinking about your proposal. Let's meet tomorrow morning. Bring the research you mentioned about new outreach models. Also, find out more about the project Mr. Reeves is involved with, discreetly. She stared at the message for a long moment before hitting send. Outside, the city lights were blinking to life, one by one. Genevieve didn't know it yet, but her world was about to change, and it would begin not with a headline, but with a quiet question she couldn't shake. Inside a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Pasadena, the real work had begun. Clara Nguyen walked the center aisle of long folding tables, clipboard in hand. The warehouse was quiet but alive, filled with soft sounds, tape being pulled from rolls, plastic casing being sealed shut, laptops humming in diagnostic cycles. There was no corporate banner, no logo, no press team, just people working. Scientists who had left university posts to be here. Educators who volunteered after school. Retired engineers who believed in the cause more than the paycheck. Each table had a task. One group calibrated the microlenses that would project the holographic maps. Another tested solar power backup units that allowed the devices to run off-grid. At the end of the line, volunteers gently packed each unit into foam-lined boxes, with one card tucked inside. To those who serve others, you are the light. This is only the beginning. No name, no branding. Clara looked over the master's spreadsheet. 243 confirmed delivery addresses. 3 more were pending security checks. Each destination had been hand-selected by Keanu and her based on months of quiet visits and referrals. No one had asked to be on the list. No one had even known they were being considered. Hospitals, women's shelters, underserved schools, rural health clinics, food banks, recovery homes, a Native American reservation still lacking internet, a mobile medical van in Appalachia, an after-school arts program in South Chicago. Each place would receive a Project Beacon device, and each one had quietly accepted Keanu's only request. Do not reveal anything until Friday at noon, all of you, together. He hadn't asked for loyalty, he simply explained the vision and let them choose. Clara stepped outside the warehouse for a moment. The California air was warm. She looked toward the skyline, knowing somewhere out there, Keanu was moving quietly in the background. He had sent his last message 2 nights ago, right after finalizing the donation total. $150 million, quietly routed. Every dollar is theirs now. Time to disappear. She had replied, disappear where? He didn't answer, not in words. But that week, a teacher from Oregon texted her out of the blue. Just met a man who showed up with 10 boxes of supplies and fixed our printer. Didn't give his name, just left a card. The card had only one word on it. China. Clara smiled at the memory. Keanu wasn't disappearing. He was planting stars. While Clara oversaw the technical side, Keanu focused on people. Every morning, before the sun rose, he visited another site. Never announced, always discreet. Sometimes he showed up with boxes of tablets for an underfunded school. Other times, it was medical gloves and wound dressings for a clinic that hadn't restocked in weeks. At a shelter in Baltimore, he simply showed up with 10 gallons of paint. He spent the afternoon brushing clean white coats across a hallway lined with peeling plaster. He didn't talk much, just worked, shoulder to shoulder with 2 volunteers who had no idea who he was. By evening, he was gone. But the next day, the shelter director received a box with a beacon device, a prepaid satellite hotspot, and a donation large enough to cover their budget for the next decade. None of the checks had names. Each one was sent through a different nonprofit arm, carefully routed to avoid headlines. But what made it powerful wasn't just the money, it was the map. Each device, when activated, would cast a 3D projection into the air, showing in real time where the funds were going. Not just totals or percentages, but stories. A child receiving a new wheelchair, a staff member being hired, a broken heater replaced before winter. Every change became a glowing point of light on the map. Every point told a human story. It was transparency not for PR but for trust. Clara ran the final pre-launch diagnostics in a dimly lit lab late Thursday night. Her hands were shaking slightly, not out of fear, but out of awe, and this wasn't just a tech rollout. It was the beginning of something bigger than anything she had imagined when she first showed Keanu her prototype in that diner all those months ago. She remembered the way he had leaned forward, eyes locked on hers, and said, "Let's light up the country, but make it about the people, not me." And he meant it. Not once had he taken credit. Not once had he asked to be mentioned. He hadn't even told his publicist. While the press still speculated about the rejection scandal at the Langston Gala, Keanu had quietly built a revolution behind the scenes. No cameras, no stage, just action. In his own home, his desk was almost empty now. Just a notebook with check marks beside every confirmed location and a single sticky note that read, "Friday noon, let the world see itself." He stood in the window that night, watching the quiet hum of city lights flickering below. Some were from mansions, others from shelters, most from forgotten corners. But tomorrow, they'd all glow. And none of them would glow for him. They'd glow because they mattered. Because someone finally showed them they were worth being seen. Friday morning arrived with little fanfare. The world turned as usual. News outlets covering political tension, celebrity gossip, and a few leftover murmurs from the Langston Gala. No one knew what was about to happen. Not the influencers sipping green juice in glass towers, not the executives preparing weekend retreats, not even Genevieve Langston, who was polishing her remarks for another high-professional interview. But at exactly 12:00 p.m. Eastern, something unexpected began to ripple through the internet. A school in rural Montana posted a video. It showed a group of children gathered around a small podium where a compact white device glowed gently. When the teacher touched the side panel, a holographic globe emerged, pulsing with blue and gold lights. Then a voiceover played, soft, steady, and without branding. "Here's where your donation went. Not to a corporation, not to a photo op, but here, to this new heating system, this warm classroom, this child now reading without gloves." Minutes later, a clinic in New Mexico posted theirs, and a shelter in Detroit, a food bank in Mississippi. One by one they lit up, not in sync, but in echo. Each post bore a simple caption, "Beacon activated. Thank you, whoever you are." Within an hour, the hashtag Project Beacon was trending. Reporters scrambled. Influencers guessed. Some thought it was a tech company campaign. Others claimed it was a government test, but no one could find a logo. No one could find a press release. Clara sat in her warehouse, watching the posts stack up on her screen like stars forming a constellation. Then, her phone rang. It was a school principal in Vermont. Her voice shook. "We've never received a donation this big. And the device, it's beautiful. The kids cried." Clara just listened. That afternoon, a nonprofit coalition in Washington published a joint statement confirming that the donations, totaling over $150 million, 0 cents, had come from anonymous sources routed through secure, untraceable grants. The only consistent element was the arrival of the beacon device at each location. By 3 p.m., over 100 different organizations had posted their activations. But still, no one could confirm where it all came from. Until a journalist noticed something strange. In every video, somewhere in the background, there was a folded card, always tucked in the corner, always the same word, shine. And with that, the story shifted. Not just toward the mystery donor, but toward the meaning. TV hosts began debating what mattered more, the amount of money or the method of giving. Was this the future of charity? Was this what accountability looked like? That night, as Keanu sat alone at a small food truck in a downtown alley, eating a plate of noodles beneath a flickering bulb, a passerby walked up and said quietly, "Are you the one who made all this happen?" Keanu looked up, blinked once, and gave a small smile. He didn't answer. He just nodded toward the lights of the city and whispered one word, "Shine." At a free clinic in Nashville, a nurse stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the small silver device now resting on the counter. It had arrived that morning with no signature, no return address, and a prepaid invoice for new ultrasound equipment. The package included a card with one word, "Shine." A few states over, in North Dakota, a school janitor found a matching device sitting inside a new library wing that had been constructed seemingly overnight. The school board had received an anonymous donation, large enough to rebuild after years of flood damage. There were tears when the first book was placed on the shelves. Then came the shelter in Kansas. A mother of 3 stood in the doorway holding a paper check that didn't make sense, enough to pay staff salaries for 5 years. When asked who delivered it, she pointed to an old man in a faded cap who'd walked away without a word. That night, the beacon device glowed in the middle of their dining hall, projecting a warm orange sphere above the table that showed how every cent would be spent. The children clapped. The staff wept. The stories were spreading faster than news stations could catch up. They weren't appearing in traditional press releases. They were whispered across phone lines, posted in community Facebook groups, and shared on local AM radio. The mystery deepened by the day. That's when Detective Marcos Ruiz first heard the name. Not Keanu, not Clara, not Beacon. Just a single phrase mumbled on a scratchy voicemail from his sister-in-law in Ohio. 2 of those silver boxes showed up at our school. Nobody knows where it came from, but it's already helped us save a kid's life. Marcos sat back in his chair. It wasn't the kind of case he was used to. No missing person, no break-in, no threat. But it tugged at something deeper. He had served with the LAPD for 22 years and now worked out of a small unit in Santa Fe, reviewing cross-jurisdictional anomalies, things that didn't add up, but didn't fall apart either. He pulled up reports of recent unexplained donations across nonprofits, schools, and clinics. Within an hour, he had a dozen bookmarked. All bore the same traits: no name, no media, no strings. And in each photo, there it was, that silver device, always paired with a card that simply said, "Shine." Detective Marcos Ruiz wasn't drawn in by conspiracy theories. He didn't believe in ghosts or anonymous billionaires playing games. What interested him was the consistency, the elegance in the pattern. Whoever was doing this wasn't hiding. They were choosing not to be seen. He leaned over his desk and began mapping locations. Detroit, Omaha, Tucson, Baton Rouge, Sacramento, Raleigh. There were no clusters, no political slant, no favor toward wealthy urban centers or desperate rural pockets. The one thing they all had in common? Need. Real, tangible, measurable need. In his years working narcotics, then child protection, then community response, Marcos had learned how to smell money. Dirty money always left a stain. Frantic paperwork, cover-ups, bribes, broken trails. But this money? It left nothing but light. On a hunch, he called a former colleague now working in nonprofit auditing. "Off the record," Marcos said, "have you seen any unusual inflows into grassroots organizations the past few months?" There was a pause on the line, then a quiet chuckle. "Unusual? Try miraculous. One of our clinics in New Jersey just had their entire cancer wing funded. No name, no paperwork delays, just cleared overnight. You think it's connected?" "I don't know yet," Marcos said, "but I think someone is reimagining philanthropy." That night, he visited a shelter in Albuquerque that had just posted a beacon activation video. The director, a middle-aged woman named Felicia, welcomed him with guarded gratitude. "We didn't call anyone," she said. Didn't want to bring attention. It's just, we've never seen anything like this. Marcos asked to see the device. It sat in a small break room, surrounded by mismatched furniture. The room darkened as she turned off the light, then activated the panel. A glowing 3D display appeared in the air. This one showed their pantry. Each glowing dot was a meal served. Another panel highlighted staff hours restored. Another showed a footnote, "Impact begins where silence ends." He looked around the room and whispered, "This isn't charity. This is structure, precision, almost sacred." Felicia smiled. "That's how it feels." Back in his car, Marcos sat in silence. He wasn't chasing a culprit. He was tracing a miracle. Every corner he turned, another act of kindness waited, woven into the lives of people who never asked for help, but desperately needed it. And always, at the center, was the same invisible thread. Shine. He knew he was getting closer, but instead of looking for the spotlight, he had to listen to the quiet. Because whoever was behind this wasn't trying to be known. They were trying to remind the world what it had forgotten. That goodness doesn't announce itself. It simply appears quietly and without applause, just when it's needed most. 2 days later, Marcos sat in his office staring at a bulletin board cluttered with pinned printouts and red string. Except this time, there was no crime scene photo, no suspect sketch, no motive for harm. Instead, there were faces, smiling children from a school on the edge of foreclosure, now holding new laptops. Doctors in a mobile van in Arizona, waving beside a newly installed power unit. A grandmother in Louisiana clutching a receipt showing her insulin now covered for the year. He didn't need to solve this, but he couldn't look away. Late that night, a janitor from a small Seattle youth center uploaded a clip. It wasn't polished, just a phone video of a child walking for the first time after physical therapy, funded by an anonymous grant. Behind them, the beacon device glowed softly. The child reached out and touched the projection in the air, then laughed. That clip went viral within hours. By sunrise, news stations had finally caught up. Headlines buzzed with phrases like "miracle donations" and "the silent benefactor." Rumors flooded social media. Some believed it was a rogue tech billionaire. Others claimed it was AI-generated generosity. One TikTok even suggested aliens. But Marcos knew better. This wasn't fantasy. This was design. Intentional, focused, relentless generosity. He revisited one specific shelter's post, where the caption read, "To the person who reminded us we're not invisible, thank you." And again, the single word, "Shun." He whispered it aloud, not as a clue anymore, as a blessing. Then something unexpected happened. A local teacher from a Los Angeles middle school emailed his department with a strange question. Is it illegal to accept a donation if you don't know who gave it? Attached was a photo of a newly painted mural in their cafeteria. It showed children climbing a staircase made of light, each step glowing brighter as they rose. In the corner was a quote stenciled in neat cursive. "We don't need more fame. We need more light." Marcos stared at it for a long time. That's when he started to let go of his original instinct. This wasn't a case. This was a calling. And as more stories poured in from forgotten places, reservations, inner-city classrooms, rural medical outposts, it became clear this wasn't about the donor. Not really. It was about something larger than a name. A reminder that in a world addicted to spectacle, someone had chosen silence. In a world chasing status, someone had chosen service. And somewhere out there, Marcos believed, that someone was still walking quietly into rooms no one noticed, and leaving behind hope. Not for credit, not for power, but simply so that others could feel seen, so they could shine. It started with a spreadsheet. A junior journalist at a Sacramento media outlet was compiling reports of anonymous donations across states. when she noticed something strange. Most beacon activations had been scattered, but a fresh wave was appearing. Nearly all had been announced with the same activation time, Friday, 8:00 p.m. Eastern. She ran it past her editor. Then a second outlet noticed the same thing. Then a third. By noon Thursday, national newsrooms were alert. What had been a feel-good mystery was now a story with a countdown. "What's happening Friday night?" reporters began asking. Clips of glowing holograms and whispered testimonies from shelters went viral again. Everyone had a theory. Was it a marketing stunt? A secret government experiment? A new social movement? And still, no official source. No press release. No public figure taking credit. In every attempt to reach out to the organizations involved, journalists were told the same thing. Bebley didn't want their name shared. Just this word, shine. That's all we know. In a sterile studio in Manhattan, Genevieve Langston was preparing for her fourth appearance on morning television since her controversial charity gala. Her red dress was tailored. Her makeup team hovered. The lights above her pulsed with warmth. She smiled at the camera as she repeated the story she'd told all week. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions to maintain the image and standard of an event that's meant to inspire. I stand by our values. Philanthropy is also performance. That's the truth of modern fundraising. But as she walked off set, her phone buzzed. It was Ethan, her assistant, texting a link to the latest viral clip. A new beacon activation in Memphis had just gone live. She clicked the video. In it, a nurse tapped the silver device and a glowing display unfolded in the air, this time in the shape of a heart. The projections showed a detailed breakdown of how $2 million, 0 cents, would be used to create a new wing at the Children's Hospital. Below the video was a comment with 13,000 likes. No suits, no red carpet, just healing. Genevieve didn't smile this time. She closed the phone and stared out the studio window. The city looked unfamiliar, like something was shifting under the surface. She turned to Ethan. "Get me the names of the hospitals that received this, every one." He hesitated. "We've already tried. Most aren't talking. But one name stood out." He showed her the list. Her eyes locked onto the fourth name, St. Gabriel's Pediatric Hospital. Genevieve's stomach dropped. She remembered that name, not because of news or reports, but because of a photograph she'd once seen, tucked into a private donor file. It was a picture of Keanu Reeves standing beside a terminally ill child there months ago. No cameras, no entourage, just him, holding the boy's hand. Genevieve stared at the hospital name for a long time. St. Gabriel's. It wasn't just a memory. It was a moment that had been quietly buried beneath layers of events, interviews, and magazine covers. She remembered that photo, the way Keanu stood, not as a celebrity, but as someone who belonged. No suit, no pretense, just a worn hoodie and eyes full of compassion. She remembered thinking it looked out of place, too raw, too quiet for the gala circuit. But now, as that same hospital activated a beacon and shared their own glowing tribute to the anonymous donor, something twisted in her chest. It wasn't guilt yet. It was doubt. Small, sharp, persistent. She clicked play on their announcement video. It opened on a pediatric doctor walking through a newly built wing, with hand-drawn art from children lining the walls. A child's voice narrated the tour, explaining where every dollar went. One room was labeled Hope Room. Another, Keanu's Corner. At the end of the video, the silver device projected a message in soft blue lettering. Every story deserves light. The screen faded to black. No credits, no brand. Just silence. Genevieve's hands trembled slightly as she set down her phone. Ethan, watching from a distance, finally spoke. "I don't think this is random anymore." She looked at him. "It never was," she whispered. "We just didn't see it." He leaned forward. "Do you think it's him?" Her mind flashed back to that night. Keanu standing at the edge of her velvet rope, invitation in hand, dressed simply, calm, no fuss, no anger, just quiet dignity. She had dismissed him in front of cameras, and he had said nothing. No tweets, no statements, no retaliation. But now the world was listening to something he hadn't even spoken aloud. She stood and paced across the room, heels clicking against the tile. "It's too coordinated," she murmured. "Too wide, too ethical." If it was a PR move, someone would have claimed it by now. Ethan nodded. And yet, no one has. No logos, no brands, just results. She stopped and looked out the window again. Manhattan moved beneath her, sleek and loud. "What happens tomorrow night at 8 p.m.? Ethan shrugged. "No one knows." Genevieve sat down slowly. She felt the familiar tug of control slipping. She had built her life around being the one with the guest list, the one who granted access, the one who defined what was beautiful and worthy of attention. But now, something different was stealing the spotlight. Not flat, not prestige, but integrity. And it was working. Every hour, another video, another story, another miracle wrapped in silence. And none of them had her name on it. For the first time in years, Genevieve Langston didn't feel like the center of the world. She felt like a footnote, and it terrified her. Genevieve didn't sleep that night. She stayed in her penthouse office past midnight, scrolling through the cascade of new posts appearing online. Rural clinics, inner-city schools, tribal reservations, women's shelters, all announcing gifts they never applied for, but desperately needed. One photo caught her breath. It showed a burned-down church in Mississippi being rebuilt. In front of it stood a man holding a small silver box, his face blurred by sunlight. Below it, the caption read, "This time, we don't need a sermon, we need action, and someone heard us." Genevieve clicked into the comments, expecting the usual internet chaos. Instead, what she found was reverence. Thousands of people across social media weren't just praising the mystery donor, they were reflecting on themselves. One woman wrote, "I used to think giving had to be flashy to matter. Now I realize silence might be the loudest kindness." Another shared, "Whoever's doing this didn't just save our shelter. They reminded us we're worth saving." It hit Genevieve hard, not because she disagreed, but because it was everything her world had trained her to ignore. She had spent years curating Image and Perfect, lighting, elite venues, celebrity endorsements. Her job was to make people feel like goodness required wealth and power to exist. That charity was a red carpet, not a quiet hallway. And now, someone was dismantling that illusion, one anonymous act at a time. She stood at the window as dawn broke over the city. Light touched the skyline like a whisper. No cameras, no applause, just light. She turned to Ethan, who had fallen asleep on the couch. "Wake up," she said quietly. He stirred. "What time is it?" "Doesn't matter. I need you to find out everything you can about St. Gabriel's last year. I want to know if Keanu ever made a formal donation." Ethan rubbed his eyes. Still trying to prove it was him? She shook her head slowly. "No, I need to understand why it matters now." He nodded and began typing. Outside, traffic resumed. The world kept spinning. But for Genevieve Langston, something fundamental had shifted. She had built an empire on being seen. Now the world was watching someone, who didn't need to be seen at all. And it was powerful, more powerful than she could have imagined. She looked down at the press invitation in her hand. For a Fashion Goa gala of impact happening next week. She dropped it into the trash. Whatever was coming tomorrow night at 8 p.m., she had a feeling it would change more than headlines. It would change her. The countdown began without anyone knowing they were part of one. At 7:59 p.m. Eastern, the world was still spinning with its usual noise. Television hosts speculating about the mystery donations, Families eating dinner, students doing homework, nurses finishing shifts. The story had stirred curiosity, even reverence, but no one could predict what would happen next. At exactly 8:00 p.m., it started. The first hologram burst to life at a children's cancer center in Pittsburgh. A nurse touched the beacon device gently, and a blue glow filled the hospital's atrium. From the center of the light rose a three-dimensional projection, rendering, in real time, the entire renovation of their oncology wing. Walls unfurled in light. Equipment appeared as shimmering forms labeled with dollar amounts. But what made people stop in their tracks was the final layer. Images of real patients. Children smiling in new beds. Therapy dogs weaving between IV stands. A new garden being planted just outside the wing. Families cried. Doctors froze. Some dropped their coffee and just stared. But the moment wasn't isolated. Within 60 seconds, a second hologram activated in a middle school in rural Iowa. It projected a transparent map of their new science lab. Every detail was visible. Computers, microscopes, supply cabinets, even scholarship plans for the top 5 students to attend, college visits out of state. Then came another in a low-income housing complex in East Los Angeles. Then one in a mental health clinic in Chicago. A women's shelter in Atlanta. A food pantry in Albuquerque. All glowing, all in sync. Newsrooms went wild. "This is happening right now," a live anchor in New York City gasped, struggling to process what they were seeing. "These holograms they're everywhere. We're hearing reports of them showing up in over 40 cities." Footage poured in faster than networks could keep up. Social media erupted. People began stepping outside, checking their own schools, clinics, and churches for the mysterious glow, and many found them. The holograms weren't just light. They were truth. Each one displayed a full breakdown of how the anonymous funds were being spent. It wasn't a list of promises. It was a living, breathing receipt made of light and accountability. Every viewer could see where the money went, who it reached, what it changed, and when it would be completed. There were no middlemen, no celebrity endorsements, no logos in the corners, just raw, transparent change. At 8:15 p.m., at least 70 known locations had activated beacons. Some included a soft, musical note upon startup, gentle, piano-like, almost like a lullaby. In one orphanage, the sound brought children running, dancing beneath the projection like it was a carnival in the sky. One teenage girl in Detroit whispered, "This is what magic must feel like." Every projection ended with a simple phrase glowing in the final image. "You deserve light." Then it would fade. Not vanish, but settle into a resting state, ready to display updates in the coming weeks as the promised changes came to life. No countdowns, no speeches, no names, just light and transformation. In the control room of a local news station in Dallas, producers scrambled to coordinate incoming footage. One whispered into their headset, "We need a map. Show all locations where it's happening." But by the time the pins were plotted, it was already outdated. Another 10 beacons had gone live while the graphic was being made. And still, no official statement. No leader stepped forward. But someone had planned this. Carefully, lovingly. Every hologram operated on the same principles. Real-time updates, financial transparency, local participation. No hidden costs, no bureaucracy, just dignity delivered in radiant detail. In a hospital in Vermont, a terminal patient who had once been forgotten by the system watched as his ward transformed in front of his eyes. "I've never been a priority," he said with tears rolling down his cheeks, "but tonight, it feels like someone finally saw me." In a school gymnasium in Mississippi, where students had never had proper uniforms or working heating, the beacon glowed over the bleachers. Projected above the basketball court was a list of new faculty positions funded for the next 5 years, along with the promise of laptops for every student. The children clapped. Not because they understood the technology, but because for once, the spotlight wasn't on who had the most, it was on those who had the least. And the country noticed. Viewers across the nation stopped switching channels. On every network, journalists were now reading from the same script, not one they wrote, but one being written by the unfolding of quiet generosity. For the first time in years, the headlines didn't involve scandal, division, or performance. They told of light. One by one, anchors and analysts were silenced by what they were watching. In Los Angeles, Genevieve Langston stood in her private apartment, blinds open, television on, wine glass untouched. Her gala had dominated fashion columns for a week, but now it felt like old news. She watched the holograms flicker across the screen. Not one of them bore her name. Not one required a red carpet. And still, every camera was now pointing away from everything she had built, toward something she could never buy, something she didn't understand. Until now, the realization struck like a chill. Impact doesn't need approval, it just needs intention. Back at St. Gabriel's Pediatric Hospital, the staff gathered in the hallway where the beacon had gone live. A nurse noticed something new. The silver device blinked softly, and a second wave of information appeared. It wasn't about the donation. It was a list of local volunteers who had signed up in the last 24 hours, inspired by what they saw. Teachers, social workers, students, even retirees. A ripple effect of hope. "Who did this?" someone whispered. Another answered softly, "I think someone who got turned away." And as the camera zoomed in on that glowing device in the center of the hospital hallway, something else appeared briefly, almost too subtle to catch. A message, faint. Light doesn't knock. It enters. 30 minutes after the first holograms ignited the night, something strange appeared on a screen at the National Satellite Monitoring Center. At first, the technician thought it was a glitch. A web of faint blue pulses stretched across a satellite map of the United States. Isolated points of light flickering with exact synchronization. Each appeared small and harmless alone, but when the technician zoomed out, the points began to take shape. Not randomly, they formed patterns, deliberate ones. The farther they zoomed, the more visible the network became. Arcing curves, symmetrical shapes, intricate links that connected rural towns, coastal cities, forgotten reservations, and urban schools into a coherent tapestry. One of the engineers whispered, "That looks like a constellation." NASA quickly rerouted the signal to a secondary satellite, confirming it wasn't a software anomaly. The lights were real. Dozens, then hundreds of active pulses, visible through low-orbit atmospheric monitoring. They weren't just creating local impact, they were writing something in the sky. By 8:42 p.m., the map had been released to a small circle of federal analysts. 5 minutes later, someone leaked the image to a news outlet. By 8:50 p.m., it was everywhere. Social media exploded with the hashtag Constellation of Kindness. Users began mapping the points, overlaying them with real-time beacon locations. The match was undeniable. The sequence wasn't just beautiful, it was intentional. Each site had been selected not only for need, but for symmetry. From above, the United States now glowed with a message carved in invisible light. It wasn't a word, it was a feeling. The world held its breath. NASA made the official announcement at 9:04 p.m. In a rare, unscheduled broadcast, a representative stood before the cameras, holding up a high-design satellite image. As of this hour, we have confirmed the existence of synchronized holographic energy pulses originating from over 150 known locations across the United States. These locations form what can only be described as a symbolic sky map, a constellation unlike any previously recorded. We believe this display was orchestrated with precise mathematical intent. Then came the final sentence. Though we do not know who is behind it, we know why it exists, and it is beautiful. The live stream shattered viewing records. Children asked their parents if they could see it from their window. Parents cried in silence. And around the world, people who had never given much thought to philanthropy, ethics, or dignity suddenly found themselves drawn to a mystery far larger than charity. It was art. It was science. It was human. And no one could explain it. Journalists scrambled to analyze the pattern. Mathematicians began calculating its geometry. The design, fluid and soft, resembled the curve of a protective wing, some said. Others claimed it looked like a mother's arms wrapped around the country. A few skeptics laughed, but no one turned away. And all the while, the same question echoed through newsrooms, living rooms, chat groups, and headlines across the globe. Who did this? In a quiet corner of her lab, Clara Gwynn sat with her team, watching the live stream from NASA. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of cooling fans and the low voices of journalists on the screen, trying to explain what none of them understood. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But in her chest, something lifted, an invisible weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Years of being dismissed, ignored, turned down for funding, told her idea was too impractical or not flashy enough, were dissolving. Now her technology, her hope, had painted the sky. Her assistant leaned over. "Should we say something?" Clara shook her head gently. "This isn't about us." Somewhere, she knew, he was watching too. Not from a rooftop, not in front of a camera, probably in a small, quiet room, the way he always preferred, alone, not seeking attention, just hoping it worked. And it had. In every city and small town, people poured into the streets. They pointed upward, even though the lights weren't visible to the naked eye. They shared their screens, passed their phones to strangers, and whispered, "Look what someone did for us." In Atlanta, a choir teacher paused rehearsal to show her students the satellite photo. One of them, a boy who had never once raised his hand, asked if the beacon at their school had caused one of those lights. "Yes," she answered, "I think it did." He smiled. Just once, it was enough. In Chicago, an overworked ER nurse on her break saw a hologram pulse near the new wing her hospital had just opened. She turned to her colleague and said, "Someone made us part of something bigger, and they didn't even ask for thanks." Meanwhile, Genevieve Langston stood in her office, surrounded by silence. The TV showed image after image of glowing points across the nation. The media had stopped covering fashion critiques of her gala. Now they were covering constellations. And no one was quoting her anymore. No one was asking about the guest list or the dress code. They were asking about the shelters she had ignored, the schools she had dismissed, the man she had humiliated. Her phone vibrated. It was Ethan texting from the hallway. "Did you know Keanu visited St. Gabriel's last year?" Quietly, no press. She didn't respond, not because she hadn't read it, but because she had. And now, all the pieces were beginning to fit. The timing, the anonymity, the exacting precision, the silence. This wasn't random. It was the quietest man in the room doing the loudest thing in the world. Still, no one had named him. The mystery continued to deepen. News outlets offered rewards for information. Investigative teams launched podcasts. People flooded online forums with theories, from billionaires in disguise to a hidden government program. But every path led to a dead end. No digital footprints. No press conferences. Just lights and impact. And yet, in the confusion, something even stranger began to happen. People stopped needing the answer. The mystery had brought them together, but the miracle kept them there. They didn't need to know who. They just needed to keep it going. By morning, the phrase, "Be the light," had been spray painted across a subway station in New York. It showed up on a mural in Albuquerque. A church in Savannah rang its bells at dawn, and printed copies of the satellite map for every family that walked in. The constellation of kindness wasn't just a display anymore. It was a movement. And still, its creator said nothing. No interviews, no press release, only light. And from the darkness of being rejected at a red carpet, something greater had been born. Something no one could take away. Not even fame. Genevieve Langston stood at the edge of her penthouse balcony, staring out across the glittering skyline of Los Angeles. Just days ago, it had all made sense. Power, applause, respect. She had been featured in magazines for her refined aesthetic and praised for her commitment to elite philanthropy. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Now it wouldn't stop buzzing, for all the wrong reasons. The constellation of kindness had eclipsed everything. Her name was trending on social media, but not for glamour or charity. She was the woman who turned Keanu Reeves away at the door. The video had gone viral again, this time as a symbol of everything wrong with performative giving. Clip after clip replayed the moment in slow motion, her sharp expression, her dismissive tone. The way Keanu had simply nodded, turned, and walked away. People dissected her words like a courtroom transcript. He's not on the list. He's not the right image for this event. Influencers who had once begged for her approval were now denouncing her in emotional videos, saying she represented everything artificial about the upper crust of charity culture. Even the celebrities who attended her gala had begun to distance themselves. Some claimed they hadn't known about the incident. Others deleted photos taken with her from their social feeds. Major donors withdrew support from her upcoming projects. Sponsors emailed formal terminations. One email read plainly, "We prefer to align with impact over exclusivity." She reread that line again and again, as if repetition would soften the blow. It didn't. Her staff, those who hadn't already walked out, now tiptoed around the office in silence. Her assistant Ethan had gone quiet too. She hadn't seen him since he sent the message about St. Gabriel's. The silence wasn't loyalty, it was retreat. She turned back inside, walked across the polished floor of her apartment, and flicked on the television. Every channel seemed to be broadcasting footage from the Beacon events. Holograms glowing at children's hospitals, schools unveiling new wings, homeless shelters filled with warmth and food. The images were real, not filtered, not curated, and the people weren't dressed in couture. They were crying, laughing, holding each other. It didn't matter how they looked. It mattered how they felt. For the first time in her career, Genevieve had no idea what to do. She opened her inbox. Over 2,000 unread messages. At first, she had tried to respond, to issue a statement, to explain. But her PR team told her the internet wasn't interested in explanations. They wanted change, or silence, and she had neither to offer. She clicked on one email from a former colleague she hadn't spoken to in years. The subject line read, "Hard to watch." Inside was a single sentence. "I hope someday you see how much more powerful humility is than control." She closed her laptop. Her curated world, built on status, exclusivity, and spectacle, was unraveling. Not through scandal, not through a rival, but through kindness. And the man she had dismissed had said not one word about her. That was the worst part. He didn't need revenge, because he had never needed the stage to begin with. That evening, Genevieve sat alone in her living room as the golden light from the windows faded into shadow. She wore a silk robe she once had flown in from Milan. Now it felt like a costume. Something heavy draped over someone she no longer recognized. She picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over Ethan's number. He had been with her for 6 years. He knew every preference, every protocol. He had been the one to bring her tea before meetings, to remind her gently when she was too harsh with staff, to double-check her speeches for tone. He hadn't quit, but he hadn't shown up either. She dialed anyway. No answer. Her chest tightened. She wasn't used to being ignored. She opened her social media accounts. Every comment was a reminder of how far she had fallen. Is this the same woman who told Keanu Reeves he didn't belong? Now we know what fake charity looks like. Real kindness doesn't need a red carpet. She scrolled past image after image of Project Beacon installations. A middle school library glowing with fresh lights. A cancer center with its new children's wing. A shelter hosting its first ever graduation ceremony for unhoused teens who'd earned their GEDs. None of the posts mentioned Keanu by name, but everyone knew, and that only made it more powerful. Genevieve's fingers trembled as she reached for a folder on the coffee table. It was her next event proposal, one she had once been proud of. Philanthropy in Motion, a night of elegance, influence, and impact. She flipped through the pages. Designer invitations, aerial silk performers, champagne tastings. It felt hollow now. Every page screamed excess. She had built a career on spectacle and precision, but now no one cared about candlelight or silver place cards. They cared about lives actually being changed, and none of her work had come close to the light spreading across the country. She looked up at the massive chandelier above her. Custom Ghazi jewel, commissioned in Paris. Its crystals didn't move, didn't glow, didn't inspire anyone. She remembered something Ethan once said, a passing comment during a staff meeting about how the best acts of kindness were the ones done when no one was watching. She had laughed it off, told him, "We're in the business of being seen." Now she finally understood what he meant. She wasn't angry. She was ashamed. Down below, on the street, she noticed a crowd gathering around a bus stop. They weren't waiting for a ride. They were looking at someone's phone. From this high up, she couldn't hear the voices, but she could see the way they leaned in, smiling, pointing. Another hologram must have gone live. She lowered the blinds slowly. She couldn't watch anymore. In the quiet of her apartment, Genevieve sat motionless. The world had turned away from everything she thought it valued. Status, exclusivity, control. And it wasn't coming back. Her fall wasn't a crash. It was a fading, a slow, unglamorous descent into irrelevance. And it had begun with one moment, one man, who didn't fight back, didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He had simply walked away. And in that silence, something larger had risen in his place. Detective Marcos Ruiz sat in his small office in Pasadena, the blinds half drawn, a styrofoam cup of black coffee cooling by his elbow. His desk was cluttered with reports, donation logs, and financial records pulled over the past 72 hours. What had started as personal curiosity had turned into something much bigger. He hadn't been ordered to investigate. There was no crime. But when the holograms first appeared, so precise, so coordinated, he knew something deeper was happening. The kind of coordination required to orchestrate hundreds of simultaneous acts of generosity didn't just happen by chance. Someone had done this deliberately, and he wanted to know who. Ruiz was meticulous, quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. That made him dangerous, not because he pursued justice loudly, but because he noticed what others didn't. A pattern had emerged. Several of the donation checks, while written from different entities, bore similar formatting. Same banking structure, same legal firm in Nevada. The names on the companies were bland and forgettable. Moonridge Partners, Silverturn LLC, Orchid Relief Fund. But one name appeared over and over again on incorporation documents, not as the owner, not as the donor, as the emergency contact, Keanu Charles Reeves. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough. Ruiz leaned back in his chair and stared at the whiteboard he'd filled with photos, timelines, and hologram locations. He didn't feel the rush of a solved case. He felt something else. A weight. A reverence. He left his badge in his drawer and grabbed his coat. 2 hours later, he stood at the edge of a public park in Burbank, watching a man sit quietly on a bench beneath a tree. Keanu wore a baseball cap and a simple black jacket. He looked like anyone, that was the point. Ruiz approached slowly, not wanting to draw attention. "Mr. Reeves?" he said quietly. Keanu looked up, calm but cautious. He offered a polite nod. Ruiz sat beside him without waiting for an invitation. He glanced around the empty path before speaking again. "I'm not here to arrest you," he said, "and I'm not here for a story." Keanu didn't respond right away. He just watched the wind move through the trees. Ruiz reached into his coat and handed him a folder. Inside were photocopies of incorporation papers, donation receipts, and images of the holograms. Keanu took a breath and closed the folder without reading it. "You found what you needed?" he asked. Ruiz nodded. "I did. And I had to know." Keanu didn't flinch. "And now that you do, I only have one question." Keanu waited. Ruiz turned to him. "Wait." Keanu looked out across the park, watching a mother help her daughter up the steps of a slide. His voice was low, steady. "The question isn't why I did it," he said. "It's why no one else did." Ruiz felt the silence that followed settle deep in his chest. He had worked homicide, fraud, organized crime. He'd seen people do unspeakable things for money, power, status. But this was someone who had every reason to be angry, every reason to retaliate, and instead he had turned it into light. Ruiz sat with the weight of Keanu's answer hanging between them. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't self-righteous, it was just true. And that truth pressed into Ruiz harder than any accusation or confession he'd ever heard. He had expected a justification, maybe a philosophical statement about justice or change. What he got instead was something far simpler, a quiet challenge. Why hadn't anyone else done it? The detective leaned forward, elbows on his knees, letting the air settle between them again. His eyes scanned the nearby playground, the laughter in the background creating a strange contrast with the tension between them. "You could have taken credit," Ruiz said eventually. "You could have made a speech, gone viral, been the face of it." Keanu smiled faintly, still looking ahead. "And then it would have been about me." "That's not nothing," Ruiz said. "You could have inspired people." "I'm not trying to inspire," Keanu replied. "I'm trying to redirect." Ruiz didn't understand at first. "Redirect what?" Keanu finally turned to face him. "Attention, energy, money. People keep saying they care, but they're obsessed with who's doing the giving instead of where the giving is going. So I made the giving the headline." Ruiz nodded slowly. "And now the whole country's looking up," Keanu added. "Not at me, but at what's possible." There was no arrogance in his tone, no sense of manipulation, just a man who had chosen to do something bold in the quietest way imaginable. Ruiz glanced back at the folder in his hands. He could hand this in, pass it to the press, use it to make a name for himself, confirm the world's biggest mystery. But he didn't want to. He thought about the way people had been talking in the grocery store this week. Parents crying in front of TV screens. Teachers at underfunded schools bursting into applause as they unpacked boxes of supplies they'd never dreamed of affording. None of them had known where it came from. And yet, they believed again, not in a person, in possibility. "What happens next?" Ruiz asked. Keanu stood slowly, stretching his arms, then slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. "That's not up to me." "You're not done, are you?" Keanu gave a soft chuckle. "Done isn't a word I use much." The wind shifted through the trees, carrying the sounds of the playground laughter. Ruiz remained seated, letting the man walk away, back down the path in silence. He didn't stop him, didn't ask for an autograph, didn't ask for more details. He just watched the man disappear into the city like a shadow melting into light. That evening, Ruiz returned to his office and shredded the photocopies he had made. He kept no notes, filed no report. When his captain asked about the investigation the next day, he said it was nothing serious. Just a rumor. And the captain didn't press. Sometimes, Ruiz thought, justice didn't look like a trial or a punishment. Sometimes justice looked like someone who could have taken all the credit, choosing to give it all away instead. The lights in the studio were warm, almost too bright for Clara Nguyen's comfort. She sat with her hands folded neatly on her lap, trying to ignore the fact that millions of people would soon be watching her speak. The journalist across from her smiled reassuringly, but Clara barely noticed. Her thoughts were somewhere else, still in the lab, still surrounded by wires and screens and untested prototypes. She had never expected to be here. Her invention had been dismissed too many times to count. It had been shelved, ridiculed, defunded. Venture capitalists told her it was too abstract. Government agencies said it lacked immediate utility. Philanthropic circles said it wouldn't look good in a portfolio. And yet, here she was. The interviewer leaned forward, voice soft and curious. "Clara, let's start with the obvious. Project Beacon. It has changed the conversation about transparency and philanthropy overnight. How does it feel to know your work has reached millions?" Clara smiled gently. "Overwhelming and humbling. You weren't always taken seriously. In fact, many of the early grant applications you submitted were rejected. What kept you going?" Her eyes softened. "One person did." There was a brief pause. The interviewer tilted his head. "You mean the anonymous donor?" Clara nodded. The camera zoomed slightly as she continued. "I met him at a diner, not in a boardroom, not at a gala. A small place with a broken jukebox and the smell of burnt coffee. I was exhausted. I had just left another pitch meeting where they told me to make my invention more flashy, more profitable." He listened, really listened. And then he asked a question I'd never been asked. "What was the question?" the interviewer asked quietly. Clara looked directly into the camera. Elm asked, "What would happen if the world didn't know who gave, only what was given?" There was a silence in the studio, the kind that demanded attention. The interviewer leaned back, visibly moved. "Do you know why he chose to stay hidden?" Clara nodded. He didn't want to be a story. He wanted to change the story. As the footage aired live across the country, classrooms paused their lessons to watch. Hospitals turned their waiting room TVs to the feed. At shelters and clinics and schools that had received Beacon devices, children and staff watched in silence, recognizing the quiet force behind everything. A few hours later, Clara's lab phone began ringing nonstop. Journalists, scientists, politicians. One call wasn't from the press. It was from a federal agency. They had reviewed her work. They wanted to fund her research. The U.S. Department of Education awarded her team a grant to expand Project Beacon into rural school systems nationwide. That same day, the Department of Health called. They wanted to integrate her holographic system into public hospital transparency efforts. Her inbox flooded with offers. Investors who once ignored her begged for a second chance. Universities asked her to guest lecture. Documentary filmmakers sent proposals. But the moment that mattered most came quietly, in the form of a letter, handwritten and unsigned. It said, "You built the light. You never needed permission to shine." Clara folded the letter slowly, her fingertips lingering on the edges. She recognized the handwriting. It was his. She didn't need a signature. He had always known the right moment to appear, and the right moment to vanish. Later that week, she was invited to speak at the National Science Forum. The hall was filled with world-renowned researchers, government leaders, and social innovators. Clara stood behind the podium, far from the flickering lights of studios and television cameras, but more nervous than ever. She wore a simple blazer and no jewelry, no slides, no video, just her voice. She began with a story, not about technology or funding, but about belief. "I was not supposed to be here," she said. "I was supposed to give up. That's what the world told me, over and over again, that the idea of real-time holographic transparency in charity work was impractical, too idealistic, too complicated. I was told the world doesn't want transparency. It wants comfort, simplicity, familiar routines. She let that sit for a second. But someone challenged me, not with money, not with fame, with silence, with a question, with trust. The room fell still. Clara continued, and didn't want credit. He wanted change. He said, "Make it work, and make it about the people, not me." She paused, her voice steady. "And so I did." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Many already suspected the identity of the mysterious backer, but Clara wasn't here to confirm suspicions. She was here to reframe the conversation. "This is not a story about one man," she said firmly. "It's about the thousands of shelters, clinics, and schools who stayed open another year. It's about the nurses who cried watching equipment arrive. It's about teachers who no longer had to ration pencils. This is a story about what happens when giving becomes invisible, and impact becomes the only thing that matters." A standing ovation rose to meet her last word. But the line that went viral the next day wasn't part of her prepared remarks. It came during the final interview backstage, when a young reporter, barely out of college, asked what her backer had taught her most. Clara looked at her, paused, and said gently, "Sometimes the loudest message is the one spoken in silence." That quote was printed in every major newspaper the following morning. It topped trending hashtags. It was painted on murals in cities and chalked on sidewalks in small towns. It became a motto in classrooms, a screensaver for exhausted nurses, a caption under the faces of people finally being seen. And through it all, Keanu remained quiet. He watched the coverage, the quotes, the movement that had blossomed from a single idea whispered across a diner table. And still, he said nothing. Because it was never about being heard. It was always about who was finally being listened to. Within a week of the broadcast, something began to shift, not just in America, but across the world. Emails flooded Clara's lab from organizations in Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia. Small grassroots nonprofits wanted to license Project Beacon's technology. They weren't asking for a handout. They were asking for a model, a way to show donors exactly how every penny changed lives. In Kenya, a community school used Beacon to reveal how their single-room building had transformed into a full campus, with bathrooms, textbooks, and a working solar roof. In Brazil, a women's shelter projected a hologram showing survivors learning computer skills in a safe, bright room. In Bangladesh, doctors used Beacon to document every vaccine delivered during a village-wide health drive. Major international NGOs followed. Then came governments. Within a month, the Canadian Ministry of Health began piloting Beacon tech in hospitals across rural provinces. Australia used it to show the breakdown of wildfire recovery funds. The European Parliament scheduled hearings to discuss mandating transparency tech for all humanitarian funding within the bloc. The world wasn't just reacting, it was realigning. At the same time, something extraordinary happened at a very personal level. People began talking, not celebrities, not politicians, but the people whose names never made headlines. A janitor from Detroit uploaded a video thanking the anonymous donor who had helped renovate the elementary school where he worked. He wiped tears from his face as he showed the new cafeteria. A nurse from Oklahoma recorded her voice in a cracked whisper, describing what it felt like to finally have enough monitors and defibrillators for her small clinic. "We used to choose which patient needed the only working one. Now we don't have to choose anymore," she said. A teenager in a foster home stood in front of a newly painted library and said simply, "Whoever you are, you gave me a future." The ripple kept growing. Donations across the globe spiked, not just in number but in purpose. People weren't just giving money, they were demanding transparency, asking questions, looking closer. They didn't want gala dinners anymore, they wanted results. And in the midst of that tidal wave of change, Genevieve Langston sat in a darkened office surrounded by silence. The room still bore the polished, curated touches she had always favored. Framed magazine covers, marble flooring, and a champagne cart untouched since her fall from grace. But something had cracked. The noise had left her, the invitations stopped. The power dulled. She reached for a small box behind her desk. Inside were old photographs, the kind no one saw anymore. She pulled them out slowly, one by one. There she was, 25, fresh out of grad school, standing in a run-down community center helping set up chairs for a fundraiser. No cameras, no gowns, just people who wanted to make a difference. Another photo, her arm around a teenage girl whose mother had just completed rehab. The look on their faces wasn't glamorous. It was grateful. She paused at a third image, a scrappy little food drive in East LL. She had helped organize it herself. She remembered that day. They ran out of bread halfway through. She spent hours calling local shops until one finally donated extra loaves. No media had covered it. But she'd never felt more real. That younger version of herself stared back at her now, unsmiling but bright-eyed. Before the brands, before the guest lists, before she believed charity needed to be beautiful. She whispered out loud, "What happened to her?" But there was no answer in the room. Just the sound of her own breathing. Genevieve placed the photos gently on her desk. For the first time in weeks, her hands stopped trembling. She leaned back and looked out the window. Below her penthouse, the city glowed in quiet constellations. Streetlights, car beams, windows still lit in apartment towers. It wasn't the curated glow of her old events. It was the messy, chaotic beauty of life moving on without her. And somewhere in that web of lights was change. She opened her laptop. The search bar hovered, waiting. She typed in Project Beacon. Hundreds of results filled the screen. Testimonials, hologram captures, volunteer applications. A video titled The Children Speak caught her eye. She clicked it. The screen filled with a group of third graders from a small public school in Nebraska. The children stood in front of their newly rebuilt gymnasium, their voices echoing in unison as they read from a letter. "Dear whoever helped us," one child began, "thank you for making our school feel new again. We have books and balls and lights that don't flicker anymore." Another girl stepped forward, holding up a drawing of a star map. "My teacher says what you did is like a constellation," she said, "so I made one. Every star is a place you helped." Then came the smallest boy, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know who you are," he said, "but we hope you know. You're our hero." Genevieve covered her mouth, eyes glassing over. She let the tears fall this time. Not out of shame, but out of something else, something deeper. Loss, yes, but also memory, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at rediscovery. The next morning, she made a decision. She didn't call a PR agency. She didn't write a statement. She got in her car and drove across town to a place she hadn't visited in years. A tiny community center she used to volunteer at before her rise to fame. It had long been forgotten in her glamorous world, but when she walked in, she was greeted with surprise and warmth. She didn't ask for attention. She asked for a broom, and she started sweeping the floors. Because in a world that now valued light over spotlight, she realized she still had time to be part of the constellation. Not by reclaiming her status, but by remembering how to give without needing to be seen. As the sun rose over the city and the day unfolded, children across the country walked into schools they loved again. Nurses stepped into clinics that finally had hope. Families entered shelters that felt safe and dignified. And overhead, satellites still captured the soft shimmer of those glowing maps. Not just light, but proof that one silent act could ignite 1,000 voices. And sometimes, the truest gratitude came from the smallest hands. Hands holding crayon-drawn stars, hands pointing upward, hands that now believed someone, somewhere, had seen them and had answered. The sun hadn't yet broken through the clouds when Genevieve sat at her kitchen table, staring at a single sheet of cream-colored paper. No laptop, no social media drafts, no publicist on standby, just a pen, just her. For days, the thought had stirred at the back of her mind. Not an apology to the world, not a statement of regret crafted for headlines, but something different, something smaller, more vulnerable. A letter. One addressed not to the public, but to the man she had so casually dismissed. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed pen to paper. She began slowly. "Dear Mr. Reeves, you don't know me beyond the worst moment I've ever displayed. And that's fair." She paused. She stared at the words, then exhaled and continued. "You didn't ask for the moment I gave you. You didn't deserve the dismissal I offered, and you certainly didn't owe the world the kindness you gave anyway." Genevieve looked out at the fog-covered skyline. The buildings once made her feel powerful. Now, they felt like reminders of how much she'd hidden behind them. She returned to the letter. "I'm not writing to salvage my image. That's gone, and maybe that's for the best. I'm writing because for the first time in my adult life, I want to ask something not as a curator of charity, but as a broken participant in it. How do I become someone who truly helps?" She underlined those words, then sat back. Her throat tightened. "You lit up the country, but more than that, you humbled it. You reminded us, reminded me, that giving doesn't need a red carpet. It needs courage and humility. Two things I thought I had, but didn't." Genevieve wiped her eyes and kept going. "Look at what you did, and I see all the things I failed to do. I thought hosting lavish galas made me a builder. But you built without asking anyone to notice." She thought of the footage from Nebraska. The kids, the handmade star map, that little boy's whisper, "You're our hero." Her breath hitched. "I didn't write this to ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned that. But I would be deeply grateful if you could tell me one thing. Just one. If someone realizes they've spent years mistaking visibility for virtue and they're ready to start over, where do they begin? What's the first step toward becoming useful again? You don't have to answer. I imagine you won't. And honestly, that would be fair too." She reached the end of the page, then added one final line. "Thank you for the silence. It said everything." She signed it only with her initials, GL. No date, no return address. Just truth. She folded the letter slowly, placed it in an unmarked envelope, and sat with it for a long moment. Not because she feared being ignored, but because this was the first act in years that wasn't meant to be seen. Finally, she stood. She had heard from someone that Clara Nguyen sometimes dropped off equipment donations at a local STEM club for girls in East Hollywood. She didn't know Clara personally, but she knew someone who did, an old contact from the nonprofit world, someone who still answered her calls, though cautiously now. Genevieve didn't ask for favors, she asked for a chance. Just to pass something along, no explanation needed. Just a letter in an envelope. Anonymously. By the time the envelope reached Clara Nguyen's hands, it had already passed through 3 people. No one asked questions. No one opened it. The quiet weight of it, just a single page, folded neatly, was enough to make them understand it wasn't theirs to read. Clara was finishing a late session at the community STEM center when one of the volunteers handed it to her. "Someone said it's meant for you to pass along," the young woman said. They wouldn't give a name. Clara nodded and slid it into her bag without hesitation. She'd learned over time that not everything needed explanation. Some messages carried more meaning because they weren't meant to be explained. Later that night, back at her small apartment, Clara lit a candle by the window and sat down at her desk. She didn't read the letter. She didn't even peek. She simply stared at the envelope for a moment, then pulled out her phone and composed a short message to a contact saved under a discreet name. The message read, "I have something that's meant for you. No return address, no fingerprints. But it feels honest." She hit send. 2 hours later, someone knocked on her door. Keanu didn't say much. He didn't have to. Clara placed the envelope in his hand. He stood silently for a moment, thumb gently tracing the edge of the flap. Then he gave her a soft smile. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, her voice low. "I didn't read it." He stepped back into the hallway and with a nod disappeared into the evening. Clara didn't need to ask what he'd do next. She already knew. Somewhere in a quiet room, maybe in the soft pool of lamplight on an old wooden table, Keanu would open the envelope and read the words for what they were. Not a plea for sympathy, not a demand for restoration, but a turning point. The kind of letter written only when a person stands on the edge of their old life, unsure if there's still enough left in them to cross into something new. And maybe he would write something back. Or maybe not, because some messages didn't require replies. Some letters simply needed to be read and remembered. For Keanu, reading the letter wasn't about judgment. It wasn't about victory either. It was a quiet acknowledgement that even those who lose their way can still ask the right question. And sometimes, asking sincerely, without performance, without agenda, was the first true act of redemption. He folded the letter, placed it in a drawer beside a photo of his sister and a small wooden sculpture a child had once carved for him at a hospital, and sat in silence for a long time. Outside his window, the world kept moving. But inside, something had settled. A thread of connection. Not between the famous and the forgotten. Not between the wealthy and the rising. But between two people. One who had learned to give quietly, and one who had just begun to understand what that truly meant. The morning air was soft and still in the community garden. A gentle breeze rustled the wildflowers, and the smell of damp earth lingered underfoot. Keanu walked the narrow stone path slowly, hands in his pockets. A folded letter resting lightly inside his jacket. This garden hadn't existed 3 months ago. Now it was filled with life. Raised vegetable beds cared for by seniors and teens, benches carved by local artists, and a shaded reading area built for neighborhood kids. The garden had no sign, no plaque, no indication of who made it possible. Just a small metal tag on a stake at the entrance that read, "Project Beacon Site 47. Keanu stopped at the center where a single tree stood tall and young, its leaves reaching toward the pale sky. He sat on the edge of the stone border, pulled out the letter, and unfolded it again. He had read it already, twice, but today the words felt different. Not because they had changed, but because she had. Keanu traced a finger over the final line. "Thank you for the silence." It said everything. He closed his eyes. Then he folded the letter one last time and tucked it away. Later that afternoon, he attended a quiet volunteer appreciation event at Roosevelt Middle School in East Pasadena. No photographers, no press. Just cafeteria pizza, folding chairs, and mismatched name tags. Keanu had been invited by the principal after helping the school secure funding for a music program through Project Beacon. He arrived unannounced, parked in the back, and slipped into the gym unnoticed. There was laughter at the far end of the room. Kids chasing each other with streamers, and clusters of parents and volunteers chatting near the refreshment table. He walked past the bulletin board displaying thank you cards in crooked lines. One card read in blue crayon, "Thank you for bringing the guitars. I like the blue one." He smiled. Then he saw her, Genevieve Langston, hair tied back, no makeup, wearing jeans, a gray volunteer t-shirt, and latex gloves as she wiped down folding tables without fanfare. No one called her name. No one followed her with a clipboard or a camera. She didn't even notice him at first. Keanu watched as she helped a boy fix his lopsided science fair poster using clear tape and gentle patience. The boy thanked her and ran off. She didn't smile for the crowd. She just nodded to herself, then returned to folding chairs. When she finally turned and spotted him standing by the far wall, her breath caught. For a second, she looked like she might speak, but she didn't. Keanu approached slowly. No entourage, no barrier between them. As two people in a school gym that smelled faintly of rubber floors and apple juice. She straightened up, unsure of what to say, her hands still in gloves, instinctively folded in front of her. He stopped a few feet away, held her gaze gently, then said only this, "You're here, that's what matters. Nothing more." And for once, Genevieve didn't try to say something profound. She didn't explain herself. She didn't deflect. She simply nodded. And then, in an unspoken rhythm, they walked to a nearby bench beneath a long row of paper lanterns taped to the gym wall. They sat side by side. No camera, no applause. Just two people who had once stood on opposite sides of a locked gate, now sitting quietly in the same light. The gym buzzed around them. Small conversations, the squeak of shoes on polished floors, the pop of a balloon somewhere in the corner. But Keanu and Genevieve sat still, the noise folding around them like distant weather. Neither seemed in a hurry to speak. Genevieve's shoulders softened first. There was no dramatic apology, no attempt to make the moment grander than it was. Her eyes remained forward, fixed on a child stacking paper cups into a wobbly tower across the room. But her voice finally came, quiet and level. "I've been here every Saturday," she said, "wiping tables, stacking chairs, helping where I can." Keanu listened, nodding once. "I kept thinking," she continued, "that changing the world would look like a stage, or a headline, or a check with a lot of zeros." Her voice broke slightly, but she didn't let it fall apart. "But sometimes it just looks like helping a janitor fix the broken lock on a storage closet." He smiled. "It does." Genevieve gave a faint laugh, more out of disbelief than humor. "I used to think silence was emptiness. Now I think maybe it's a sign you're finally listening." She turned to face him for the first time. "I don't expect you to forget what I did. I just wanted you to know. I'm trying," quietly. Keanu's reply was steady. "I know." They sat there for a few more minutes, saying nothing, just letting the air breathe between them. A child ran past them with a handful of cupcakes and nearly tripped. Genevieve reached out, steadied him with a quick hand, and smiled without thinking. The boy barely noticed and kept running. She looked at Keanu. "Do they know who you are?" He shook his head. "They don't need to." There was something in that answer that settled deeply into her. A truth that had once embarrassed her, now steadied her. He wasn't being modest. He was being purposeful. Keanu glanced at the wall behind them, where students had pinned hand-drawn posters. "Thank you, Project Beacon," in glitter markers and crooked letters. One poster had traced outlines of tiny hands and read, "You changed our school." He stood slowly. Genevieve rose with him. Before walking away, she asked the question she had written in a letter but never expected to ask aloud. "How do I become someone who truly helps?" Keanu thought for a moment, then pointed subtly toward the center of the gym, where an elderly man was struggling to carry a stack of boxed art supplies toward the exit. "Start there?" She followed his gaze, then his footsteps as Keanu walked over and took the boxes without a word. The man thanked him, unaware of who he was. Genevieve stepped in beside him. They carried the boxes out together. No cameras, no explanations, just two people who had changed. In the parking lot, as volunteers began trickling out under the setting sun, Keanu turned to her one last time. "You don't need to tell people what you're doing, just do it." Genevieve nodded. "I will." Then she walked in one direction, and he walked in another. The day faded gently behind them, but something remained lit inside each of them. A quiet reunion, built not on forgiveness, but on forward motion. The day was quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from stillness, but the kind that follows something profound, a kind of hush that fills the air when people are watching not for spectacle, but for meaning. Keanu stood in the soil outside St. Gabriel's Children's Hospital. The last light of day brushed across the parking lot. In his hands, a small sapling, its roots bundled tight, its trunk no thicker than his wrist. He knelt beside the sidewalk, just past the edge of the new pediatric wing that had been built using Project Beacon's funding. No press, no speeches, just earth and effort. A nearby nurse, pausing on her break, watched him silently from a distance, unsure whether to approach. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and chose not to acknowledge it. He was present, not just in the moment, but in the reason behind it. With careful hands, he pressed the tree's roots into the soil, layered it gently with mulch, then stood to water it from a steel pitcher brought from the hospital's maintenance closet. Around him, the sound of children playing filtered from behind the glass. Laughter, footsteps, the high-pitched hum of a scooter wheel. In the reflection of the hospital windows, a faint hologram shimmered and faded. The final beacon projection slowly dimmed as the sun dropped behind the horizon. It had done its work, showing the community not just what had been donated, but how it had been transformed into healing, food, shelter, and learning. That final projection wasn't dramatic. It showed a boy reading beneath a new library light, a nurse adjusting a monitor with new training, a teacher using new supplies in a room full of laughter. And then it disappeared. The voiceover began, not booming, not stylized, calm, reflective. When someone closes a door in your face, don't knock again. Keanu stood, wiped the dirt from his hands onto his jeans, and glanced once more at the sapling. Its leaves trembled slightly in the breeze. Behind him, the laughter continued. One of the children waved from a window. He waved back. "Build something so beautiful," the voiceover continued, "that the whole world wants in." Across the country, the ripple effects of Project Beacon were still unfolding. At shelters in Chicago, warm beds were being made. In schools across Appalachia, smart boards blinked on in classrooms that had once been silent. At a women's clinic in New Mexico, a volunteer handed a mother a fresh blanket for her newborn. None of these people knew the full story. None of them needed to. What mattered wasn't the origin. What mattered was the result. One act of rejection had been turned into 1,000 acts of restoration. One closed door had led to a path no one had seen coming. Keanu had never raised his voice, never issued a public statement, never retaliated. And yet, his answer had echoed louder than any words. Back at the hospital, a volunteer approached from behind. It was an older man, maybe in his 60s, carrying a small wooden sign with the word "Hope" carved into it. "Mind if I place this next to the tree?" he asked. Keanu nodded, stepping aside. Together, they pressed the sign into the earth. Then the man walked away. Keanu remained. Not as a star, not as a name, just as someone who had chosen to act when it would have been easier to walk away. At that same moment, in homes across the country, viewers watched replay footage on news channels and social media, side-by-side clips of Genevieve turning Keanu away at the luxury gala, and then clips of hospitals glowing with real-time projections of the donations she once dismissed as not the right image. But something unexpected had happened. The conversation had shifted. People weren't mocking Genevieve anymore. They were talking about the contrast between image and impact, between performance and purpose, between being seen and being useful. And in that shift, a cultural mirror was quietly being held up. A mother in Ohio posted, "My son got a new wheelchair because of Project Beacon. I don't care who started it, but I hope they know they saved my family." A veteran in Texas wrote, "I served 22 years. This week someone installed heating in our shelter. No names, no speeches, just warmth." That's what honor looks like. At a small public library in Maine, a children's reading corner lit up with new lamps funded by an anonymous donation. A librarian placed a sticky note on one of the shelves. It read, "Whoever you are, thank you for seeing us." The word spread not through headlines but through homes, not through interviews but through action. People began sharing their own stories of quiet kindness. Strangers helped each other pay for groceries. Teachers shared supplies with neighboring schools. Artists made murals celebrating invisible acts of good. It was as if one invisible spark had found the dry kindling of a tired world and ignited something honest. Keanu didn't return to the spotlight. He didn't post a statement. He didn't trademark Project Beacon. The devices themselves had no brand, no logo, no celebrity endorsements. Only one symbol appeared, a small constellation of stars engraved into the metal. It matched the satellite footage, the now famous constellation of kindness. And yet, for all the silence around his role, people began to sense the truth, not because Keanu said anything, but because it felt like something he'd do. One child at a cancer center whispered to her mom, "I think the Matrix Man made this." She wasn't wrong. Back at the hospital garden, Keanu sat on a bench. From the side, Genevieve approached with a paper bag. She'd been volunteering quietly for the past few weeks, sorting supplies, picking up trash, helping with after-school programs. She didn't expect to see him here, but when she did, she hesitated. He looked up. "You're here," he said simply. She nodded. "I didn't come for anything." He gestured to the bench beside him. They sat in silence. The air was cool. The lights inside the hospital flickered on as dusk fell. A nurse wheeled a boy out onto the patio, and the child smiled at the two of them before turning back toward the flower beds. "I still don't know what I'm doing," Genevieve whispered. "You showed up," Keanu replied. "That's enough to begin." The final holographic projection, now part of the hospital's permanent installation, glowed faintly against the wall behind them. It displayed no faces, no credit, only data. Lives improved, meals served, beds offered, books read, dreams sparked. As the image faded into night, the voiceover returned one last time. "Have you ever been underestimated and proved someone wrong with kindness? Share your story in the comments. And tell us, what story should we tell next about Keanu Reeves choosing compassion over pride?" Then the screen faded to black, not with applause, but with quiet understanding.